Well, old friend, it's been good, but maybe it's time we go our separate ways? Recently, we uploaded a video talking about the end of the Switch, and a lot of people in the comments seem to think the Switch will just be here forever, which, I'm sorry to say, is just not a realistic idea, and I don't know where anyone really came up with that thought. Even the most successful of consoles eventually needed to ride off into the sunset. Technology advances rapidly, so every console will be outdated sooner or later, and the Switch, it's really at that point. It's been out for 6 years, and a lot of the technology used was even outdated at the time it came out. In 2017, a 720p screen was still considered low quality, and 1080p at the time was standard, with 4K just starting to take over around that time. The power of the Switch is really in between the Wii U and the PS4, where it can still play many 8th gen games, but at a lower quality. It's a trade-off for the console to be cheaper and therefore more accessible, as well as it being portable. Now, 6 years later, the Switch is really starting to show its age. The PS5 and Xbox Series X came out all the way back in 2020, and support for last-gen consoles can only go on so much longer. When the PS4 and Xbox One, which are both turning 10 years old this year, lose their support, it's safe to say the Switch's third-party support by AAA companies will follow. To keep third-party support, Nintendo doesn't need the most powerful console, but it at least needs to be somewhat competitive. The Switch completely changed things up for Nintendo, as since 1989, when the original Game Boy came out, Nintendo has always had a home console and a handheld they were supporting at the same time. The NES and the Game Boy, the Super NES, and still the Game Boy, the N64 and the Game Boy Color, the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance, the Wii and the DS, the Wii U and the 3DS, and now, just the Switch. Does Nintendo just go back to making a dedicated home console and a dedicated handheld? I think it's very unlikely. The Switch is the best-selling Nintendo system not called the DS, and the third best-selling system of all time following the PS2 and the DS. And this is coming off of one of Nintendo's biggest failures of all time in the Wii U. Aw, man. Instead of having two systems with two different libraries, Nintendo put all of their efforts into one system, and it paid off. I think the Nintendo Switch successor will be another hybrid system, but it won't be exactly the same. I think it'll upgrade to a 1080p screen in handheld mode, and a 4K resolution while docked. And I also think that the dock will increase the power of the system. On the current Switch, all docking the system does is increase the resolution. I don't know if Nintendo would make exclusive games just for TV mode, but I do think they'd want to give a boost in power this time. As for the controllers, I'm not sure what they'd do. On one hand, they could just make an upgrade to the Joy-Cons and also allow original Switch Joy-Cons to work on the system, kind of like how Wii remotes worked on the Wii U, or they could completely switch it up. There's only so many options they'd have for another hybrid system though, and I don't know how many more features they would add outside of maybe a microphone. The current Joy-Cons have HD rumble, which I always thought was a really cool idea, but it's kind of been forgotten about in recent years. And the right Joy-Con has its IR sensor, which, kind of been forgotten about pretty much too. I feel like that typically happens with Nintendo systems after the first year. They've come out with some of these really cool gimmicks, but they're just completely forgotten about. Like with AR stuff on the 3DS, or, the 3D stuff on the 3DS. If I had to guess a new feature, I think it'd be some sort of touchpad on the Joy-Cons, like with the PS4 and the PS5 controller, and also analog triggers instead of digital triggers. For those of you who don't know what that means, you remember how on PS4 or PS5 or the Xboxes in the same generation, when you press down on the trigger, it's not just a click. Like if you're driving a car in a game and you slightly push down the trigger, it won't go at full speed, but if you press it down all the way, it'd go faster. Nintendo actually had this with the GameCube controller, and they think it's time to bring it back. As for the online system, I just don't know. Nintendo made some improvements with the Wii U where they actually had usernames instead of friend codes, but then they went back to friend codes for seemingly no reason. There's no achievements, there's no clip sharing, it's really just pretty bare bones. Essentially, all you can do is show the games you've played and a PFP. There's no parties, and in fact, to even use voice chat, you need to download the Switch mobile app. I have so many memories of just getting on parties with my friends on PlayStation or Xbox. You just can't do that on Switch. Yeah, you could use Discord, but then you're just requiring a third-party service that maybe not everyone has. Lastly, I want to talk about backwards compatibility. I definitely think the Switch 2, or whatever it's called, would be backwards compatible. Even if the cartridges are different, and they should be, since games are just so much bigger now. They could always add a second cartridge slot, like with the DS having a GBA slot. Or just do something like with the 3DS, which of course had that notch to stop people from putting those games into a DS. Anyway, that's what I think a Switch 2 would and should be like. Do you agree? What ideas do you have? If you enjoyed this video, we'd appreciate it if you'd like it, subscribe it, turn on notifications, and check out some of our future content. This has been Brett with Game Domain. Take care.